Hello. This is a quick message from the production team. I hope you are enjoying the Illegally Speaking podcast. Due to the current COVID-19 link crisis, the next few episodes will be recorded through our video communication software. Thanks for your understanding and do stay safe. The episode will now begin.
Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast, powered by Kassoon Car. I'm your host, Rob Hanna. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Sophie Vanhegan, an employment partner at GQ Littler. So welcome, Sophie.
Hi, Rob. Thanks very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I think we were talking just off air that you haven't seen it before, but as you may or may not know, our customary question on the Legally Speaking podcast is around suits. So on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, how real would you rate the hit series Suits from what you've heard?
As I said, yes, I haven't ever seen an episode before, so I'm going to take a wild guess of about 4 out of 10.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very sound and safe guess from what we've had from lots of people who've been in the industry have said that. So, it's a real pleasure to have you on. You've achieved such a tremendous amount throughout your legal career, which we're definitely going to be talking about on today's episode. But let's sort of take it back to the start. Did you always want to be a lawyer?
I decided I wanted to be a lawyer at a geekily early age. There was a program for people of my age in the 90s called Kavanagh QC, which as a teenager I became rather addicted to watching. And it was about a criminal barrister standing up and defending clients. And I remember watching that when I was about 14, 15 and thinking, that looks like quite a cool job, standing up, making arguments for one side or the other. I quite like the look of that. And it went from there, really. I decided that I thought I would be interested in law. By the time I got to sixth form, I was very clear that I wanted to study law at university. And it carried on from there, essentially.
Yeah, well, great. And you went to Cambridge. How did you find your time there?
I loved studying there. I think doing a law degree there was pretty intense, but I think most law degrees are quite intense compared to some of the other subjects. So it was a question of working very hard and working very intensely, but that sets you up well for a career in private practice, I think, for dealing with client demands and dealing with intense periods of working. It was also a really formative experience. It really made me more confident. It made me very focused and driven with where I wanted to go with my career. So it was an amazing experience. I loved being there.
Great. And then from sort of Cambridge, you successfully joined Linklaters, right? Do you want to sort of tell us about your time there? And then secondly, why you chose to specialise in employment?
Sure. So in the second year of my law degree, I did what everybody else did, which was to apply for lots of vacation schemes. And I managed to get 2, one being at a US firm and the other being at Linklaters. So off I trotted in the summer holiday between my second and third year for a month's vacation scheme at Linklaters. And I absolutely loved it. It was a fantastic firm. I could see that if I could get a training contract there, I would have amazing opportunities to work on really high profile work, to be part of one of the biggest, most successful law firms in the world. So I applied for a training contract at the end of that vacation scheme and luckily got it. And I duly started my training contract there in 2006. In terms of employment law, you don't tend to start a training contract at Linklaters with aspirations of being an employment lawyer. You tend to more be planning to end up being in one of the big engines of the firm, such as corporate or finance. But I did study employment law as one of my papers in my third year, and I always found it academically very interesting. And I thought, okay, I'd like to get a seat in employment law during my training contract, which I was lucky enough to do. And I think the thing that really appealed to me as an employment lawyer in the city was that you were still getting the black letter law experience. I've always enjoyed the technical side of being a lawyer. You still get to take part in some much bigger matters. So at Linklaters, that meant being part of some of the big deals and transactions, as well as big high court cases. But I also liked the more human element of being an employment lawyer, that you are actually dealing with people and their jobs and the issues that they come up with at work. So for me, it gave the best combination of work while still being a lawyer in the city, which, you know, is still one of the big hubs of our legal services industry in the UK. So those are all the factors that led to me joining Linklaters and then ultimately deciding that I really wanted to be an employment lawyer.
Yeah, great. And you know, you've done so much in the world of employment. Maybe for people listening in, do you want to sort of tell a bit more about the breadth of your practice and how much you do within the employment space generally?
Sure. So when I was at Linklaters, I obviously did quite a lot of corporate support work, and I worked on some very large transactions there. But I was also lucky enough there to get some exposure to some real high value litigation. So I was the lead associate on a multi-million pound bonus claim that went to a 5-week high court trial that was Attrell and Dresdner Kleinwort. And that really gave me the taste for employment litigation, particularly in the high court world. So when I moved on to GQ Littler, that was something that I very much wanted to continue and have been lucky enough to continue. So I would say that now my practice consists of a lot of litigation, particularly on the high court side, which for an employment lawyer means bonus disputes, restrictive covenant issues, and also team moves. But I also do that alongside a full raft of advisory work. And something that I'm increasingly focusing on in the last couple of years by virtue of my financial services clients is the interaction between employment law and the senior managers certification regime that was rolled out for banks a few years ago, but as of December last year also got rolled out to solo regulated firms. So I'd say those are my two particular areas of interest and specialism: the regulatory piece for the financial services sector in terms of its employment law interaction, but then also the high value complex employment litigation.
Yeah. And again, I'm very impressed by everything you've achieved. And just to go back a step, you obviously spent 6 wonderful years with Linklaters, and then you touched on it there and where you're currently with GQ Littler in terms of joining them as a senior associate. Do you want to maybe explain having trained, been with a Magic Circle firm, moving to a firm like GQ Littler, your experiences and perhaps what you found in terms of some similarities and certain differences as well?
Sure. So yes, I joined GQ Littler back in 2012 when the firm was only 2 years old. And lots of people ask me, well, why on earth did you go from a Magic Circle firm to joining a 2-year-old startup? And the answer is quite simple. The G and the Q are John Gilligan and Paul Quain, who are the two founding partners. And I had worked with both of them at Linklaters, but particularly Paul. Paul, many years ago, was my trainee supervisor when I was in the employment team there. And I always got on very well with him when we were at Linklaters together. I'd worked with him a lot. And I was always very interested in his decision to leave to set up an employment boutique. So I'd kept an eye on how they were developing, and I could see that they were doing something different and something exciting. So that is why I basically decided to take a leap of faith when they were 2 years old, because I thought, well, okay, they've survived 2 years, they must be doing okay. And I thought, actually, I was at a stage in my career where I was coming up for that promotion to senior associate. And I was very conscious of what lots of recruiters were always telling me, which Rob may know better than me, whether this is still true, that 2 to 4 PQE is a very prime window for moving if you do want to move firms. And so I thought, actually, where I am in my life and my career at the moment, I think this is the right time for me to go across. And I've never really looked back. Compared to how the firm was when I joined and where it is now, they're completely different. It's like comparing day and night. And we're obviously now a much bigger team in London, and we're also part of a much bigger organisation in terms of Littler Global. In terms of what things I found different, well, I mean, it was everything from when I first joined GQ, we were in serviced offices where you had to pay money to get the bulk photocopier to work out in the shared areas. I'm pleased to say that we now have our own much bigger offices with fully functioning photocopiers. I went from a full service firm to an employment boutique, a full service traditional law firm with lots of very big support teams, to a much leaner support team model. But also, I think the advantage of going and becoming part of the team that was the firm and is the driver of the revenue of the firm. I think in a lot of full service firms, and I may be wrong, employment lawyers don't have the same input into the strategic direction of the firm. And one of the things I really like about the boutique model as an employment lawyer is that means you get a lot more influence and say into how the business develops, which when you combine it with a relatively new business where you're not tied up in a bigger bureaucracy, that's meant that we've been able to move quite nimbly and quickly to develop the firm in the direction that we want to with relatively few constraints.
Yeah. So I think in terms of people listening in then, to take away from that, I think it was a very measured, shall you say, risk, joining, the firm 2 years in, but you'd had kind of trust built up and you knew of the people, and respected and trusted the partners that you would be joining. And I think that's really good insights for people to sort of take away. If you're going to make a move and, you're potentially going to take that step, then, if you do as much due diligence or you're kind of using trusted networks, that's always going to help. And, I guess that trust has always been sort of put in you, vice versa, as well as you successfully made partner with the firm quite soon on after joining, which is obviously testament to all the work that you did. Do you want to sort of talk about that journey in a boutique to making partnership?
Sure. So I think it's pretty fair to say that the transition and the business case to moving up to partner can be a little easier than at the full service traditional law firms. Yeah. We're not constrained by having enforced ratios of partners to non-partners. I think it was two things. My initial promotion came about on the basis of shoring up the levels of primarily fee-earning focused partners, so that certain equity partners could more focus on the running of the business. That's obviously developed and changed over time the longer that I've been a partner, as I've taken on management responsibilities. I think it was also, I had been able to demonstrate that I could run matters, I could run larger matters, I could supervise teams of more junior lawyers. So it was a promotion that came as soon as I returned from my first maternity leave, actually, which hopefully is also a reassuring message to get out there. And it also meant that I became the first female partner at our firm. And it was a transition that I think was well supported within the team. The existing partners were very keen to support my transition into that more senior role. And that also happened at the same time as my decision to go part-time. So there were lots of changes that happened at the same time when that promotion came about. But I think it's panned out quite well. So I think it was a different set of circumstances because I was being promoted when the firm was still growing, and as it continues to do so now. But without them having the big constraints of very formal, prescriptive partnership processes that a lot of the bigger, more traditional law firms have.
And that's just such a wonderful case study, outlining your journey there, particularly within a boutique, because you have been able to, successfully, have a young family as well as sort of hit the optimal goal, which everyone strives to achieve, typically of partnership. And hopefully that inspires lots of people that, if you get into the right environment, you work hard and you facilitate the right plan, it is very achievable. So that really does highlight that it's out there and successful people can emulate what you've done, which is highly, highly successful. So congratulations.
Thank you.
In terms of the times that we're living at the moment, I guess, most people will be shouting at me, I'm sure, to say, come on, let's talk about, coronavirus and all things employment. So, this is not a legal kind of, hour of advice, but come on, let's talk about, obviously, the current pandemic, which is a crisis that we're in, unfortunately. Do you want to maybe share a bit more about your practice and what you're seeing in terms of certain trends as a result of the government's recent and ongoing announcements?
Sure. So I think it's fair to say that employment lawyers, our market is often counter-cyclical. So when the world starts to face a huge crisis like the one we're going through at the moment, we certainly see quite a big flurry of needs from our clients while they scramble around working out what the best thing to do is for their business, but also for their workforces. Lots of clients, particularly those in the sectors that have been most sharply impacted, such as retail and hospitality, were already thinking very quickly about what measures they could take essentially to cut their staff costs as quickly as possible. So we saw lots of clients very quickly looking at whether there were redundancy measures they could take, but also what alternatives they could take to redundancy, such as asking people to take unpaid leave, asking people to reduce their hours or reduce their salary, delaying salary increases, and also asking people to go on a period of holiday just to get them through those initial weeks. The landscape changed significantly 10 days ago when the government then announced the coronavirus job retention scheme, under which their employers can now furlough employees and essentially pay them 80% of their salary, or up to £2,500 a month, in order to keep them in employment, but essentially say, go home, don't do any work, and hopefully reduce the numbers of redundancies. So particularly the last week and a half, we have seen an awful lot of inquiries around that, because I think everyone hopes that the economy will recover quite quickly once the restrictions are lifted. So people are very much looking into furlough as an option where they essentially are keeping their employees, albeit that they are not working, and therefore they are hopefully going to be able to come back to work as soon as the restrictions are relaxed and the economy gets going again. So there's been all sorts of options that people have been exploring. And I think it will be interesting to see, because at the moment the furlough scheme is going to run until the end of May. I know over the weekend there's been talk about there being a 6-month period before life gets back to normal. How that scheme will be reviewed at the end of May, if we are still in the lockdown period that we are at the moment, or if we are still in very much a very muted level of economic activity, such that employers don't yet have the work for those staff to come back to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there is still a very much a high level of uncertainty. And as you say, you touched on there, the sort of 6-month, potentially even longer, they say, in terms of, back to what we might deem the norm. I guess for, generally employers thinking about COVID-19 in terms of sort of, policies and sort of bringing them out and driving them out, is there anything you've seen, or what employers maybe should be thinking about that they hadn't historically had to think about in terms of prior to all of this?
So lots of employers who had never really had practices of working from home have had to very quickly get large amounts of people effectively working from home. That's been quite an interesting development, from practical issues such as getting enough laptops for their staff. That's been made more complicated, would you believe it, by the factories in China that make a lot of the components for those laptops having been shut for a while, alongside the whole of the world looking to get more and more of their staff working from home, leading to serious laptop shortages. And what do you do with your staff if you can't yet get them a laptop, but you know you're going to get them one in 2 weeks? Do you give them special leave? Do you say you need to be placed on holiday? So there's been practical issue of getting staff working from home. There's also been a second issue about working out who you do still really need to come into the office, and how do you manage those staff understandably feeling anxious about still having to travel into the office. The FCA indicated a few weeks ago that certain regulated persons would fall into the key worker category. So lots of our financial services firm clients have had an interesting issue to consider in terms of people who you wouldn't necessarily automatically think would need to be going into the office, working out who falls into that bucket. Also, what do you do with the people who can't work from home? So the people who work in your post room, the people who work in your print room. I think the furlough scheme is being looked at very closely for those categories of people. It's thrown up so many HR questions because you are rolling out very wide changes to your workforce. And then on top of that, you're layering whether you actually need to look at cost-saving measures for your business in the meantime. So it's really touching upon lots of policies, whether that's your working from home policy, whether it's your holiday policy. Are you going to make people still take holiday while we're in this lockdown period? Or are you going to let people roll over more holiday? And then it also impacts your business as usual things. So we've had companies ask us, well, this person was being performance managed. Can we carry on that performance management process while we're all working remotely? And we're seeing lots of companies having to get used to running meetings such as that, which they would normally be running very much in person, switching to running those by video. So it really is touching upon every aspect of people's working lives.
Absolutely. And I think, there's so many great things you've just touched on there. And I know there's even more to go in, but it hopefully, as a result of all of this, people will get through it. The one thing I know particularly about GQ Litter, as well as you are, you're a boutique firm, but you're very human in terms of your approach. And you are also sort of a firm that promotes sort of flexible, agile working as well, is great. But I was going to ask a question more generally for the legal sector. The legal sector historically has had a bit of a bashing for not being very flexible and not necessarily, some firms allowing flexible working where it potentially could be given. Do you think as a result of all of this happening and law firms, ultimately having to function remotely, that this will kind of put the legal sector a step further forward in terms of that sort of offering?
I certainly hope so. I mean, yes, as you say, GQ Littler, we have always been quite ahead of the curve in terms of agile working, and we felt slightly smug a couple of weeks ago because it meant that we found the transition to having our whole team working from home much easier because we already had the hardware in place to enable that to happen, and we were just used culturally to most people working from home at least one day a week, but lots of our team work from home 2 or 3 days a week ordinarily. I've been quite surprised at the number of reports I've heard of law firms who had not had any regular home working arrangements at all, so have had to scrabble around quite frantically to get those systems in place. Although I think that should be a minority, because I think most firms in the city at least had moved to a pattern of generally encouraging working from home 1 day a week. So yes, I would hope for the firms that had previously been more resistant to working from home at all, that they will see that it can be done and it can be done effectively. So I very much hope that will change mindsets and encourage that. I think the interesting thing also is in terms of the other side of flexible working, one of the key other sides of flexible working being part-time working, and whether the crisis that we're in at the moment sees greater understanding of that, because I think that is still the thing that is difficult in private practice, and that some teams do really struggle with making work. And I think that is a key issue to be addressed in terms of seeing more women in more senior roles in private practice, seeing that happen and actually happen effectively, and people genuinely working part-time and not just squashing a full-time job into part-time hours, which so often seems to be the occupational hazard of trying to work part-time in private practice. So yes, I think lots of things are going to be tested during this time, and I certainly hope it will result in some longer-term changes for the better when we do all get back to normal, whenever that may be.
Indeed. Well, let's hope, we're all praying that it'll be, sooner rather than later. And I guess that you talked about mindset there. And as a partner of a law firm, you're in a leadership position. And lots of people have been saying, how do you keep your colleagues motivated? At times like this, it is quite hard for certain people to stay positive, to stay as productive. People are talking about staying match fit, almost the work from home to keep yourself operationing as you would in an office environment. Do you have any tips as a partner or anything you do within the firm generally in terms of keeping that team spirit nice and high?
Sure. So at the moment, we are having a morning call every Monday to Friday, every morning, which is by video, for everyone to just check in, people to ask if they have any questions. We are also having a weekly happy hour at 5:00 for a more light-hearted discussion, and there have definitely been beers and gin and tonics on view during those video calls. But the other thing, I have HR responsibility within our firm, and one of the things I've also been very keen to ensure we keep an eye on is people's individual well-being and how they are coping, because this is obviously a difficult time for everybody. So I'm also having one-to-one video chats with everyone at least once a fortnight, just to really say, how are you? How are you finding it? Is work okay? Are you managing with work okay? Is there anything worrying you? Just to try and encourage people to be open and communicate as possible, because I think that's the key thing with everyone working in different locations, to make people feel that they can still say if something is causing them issues. Because the downside of this is that you can't just turn around in the office and say to somebody, can we just go and get a coffee, or can we have a few minutes next door to have a chat on a more private level. So I think as a team, we are very much trying to put proactive steps in place to actively monitor people and actively check in with people, so that we don't have people individually sort of going to ground and letting things get on top of them.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I think even more so, whether you agree with this in terms of, the mental health, first aid with people talking about in terms of having mental health officers becoming almost, as standard rather than options, I think is going to be increasing more and more as a result of this too, because I think you've just got to put people's well-being first.
Absolutely. It's a difficult time for everybody personally, particularly given that we don't know how long this situation is going to go on for. So the more we can do to pull together and support each other, the better, I think, at the moment.
And on a more positive note, Sophie, when business is normal, you are a real success story in terms of everything you've achieved, from sort of strong academics through to a Magic Circle firm, through to a top boutique in your field, and making partnership as well as sort of running family life. What tips would you give to perhaps more junior people, aspirational lawyers listening in, to what practical steps they may need to take to try and emulate your successes?
Well, I think having drive and focus has always helped me throughout my career. I was very clear at the beginning that I really wanted to go to a big firm if I could get a job at a really big firm and take all the opportunities that offered to me. But to keep checking in with yourself and thinking, where is my career at the moment? Where do I want it to go? And what kind of things do I need to do to get to the next level? But I think also as you become more senior, also stepping back and putting boundaries between your career and your personal life, which I think becomes all the more critical when you do decide to have a family and continue your career as a lawyer. I think when I was junior, I found it very difficult to say no, either internally or externally. And the more senior you get, the more important it is to have the confidence to put limits on what you can do professionally, so that you are still giving your best in your career, but you are also preserving something of yourself for your personal life and for your family commitments, so that you don't end up in the situation where you just feel, which I think is quite easy to happen as a lawyer in the city, that your life is your job and that something has to give, because I think that is still too often the problem, particularly for women coming up to the senior ranks, that when they have children, they feel that it becomes a choice between their job and their home life. And I really think if you can put boundaries between your work and your home life, and you also can work in a team where you have a team that's supportive of you doing that, that is a key way of keeping your career going and keeping your career progressing. And that's certainly something that I found that I've been lucky enough to have at GQ Littler. Of the partnership and the whole team have always been very supportive of me working part-time, as have my clients, and also not being fearful to be upfront with your clients that you do have a life outside the law. I think lawyers are very often frightened to let clients see that they are not just at their desk 24/7, always ready. And clients, I think, generally respect that, because most clients are in a similar situation, trying to juggle different areas of their life. So I think work hard, be driven and focus, but also do have the confidence to put boundaries in between your work life and your personal life. I think those are all key things that have really helped me and guided me through my career.
Great stuff. And of course, listen to the Legally Speaking podcast, just to get regular
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Sophie, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. I think all of your journey, your insights, and also touching on coronavirus, I'm sure there's lots of helpful content there for our listeners listening in. So thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm wishing you lots of continued success, and no doubt we'll see you feature on here again in the future.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been really interesting to have a discussion, and I hope you and all your listeners do get through this difficult spell okay, and I look forward to meeting you and your listeners when we get back to normal.
Great stuff. Many thanks. Cheers, Sophie.
Thank you.